Very insightful. Okay, so I have the pleasure of introducing a very dear friend who is also the co-organizer of this event. I know a little bit about Linda Alvarez's work because she talks to me when she's going to Ohio to interview Guatemalan workers. So I can appreciate the depth of the type of research that she's doing, and I think it's going to be very interesting for you to hear what she has to say. So, Linda. Hi. Linda was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley, right, sorry. I'm supposed to say Dr. Alvarez, but we're going to call her Linda. Linda earned a BA in Spanish language and literature from California State University, Northridge. From there, she went on to complete an MA in Latin American Studies at California State University, Los Angeles, as well as an MA in International Studies and a PhD in Political Science from Claremont Graduate University. That's a lot. Professor Alvarez's scholarly interest includes comparative politics, Latin American politics, comparative political behavior, and political psychology, as well as social movements and the politics of food. Her current research focuses on political knowledge, migration, race and ethnicity, and transnational political engagement among underrepresented groups in Central America and the United States. The good thing, though, is that when you actually hear her talk, she's not going to be like over everybody's head. So she's a great speaker. Dr. Alvarez also serves on the advisory board of Food Empowerment Project. Linda has been involved in animal rights activism and animal rescue from a very young age. Over the past 20 years, she has been formally involved in domestic and farm animal rescue in Southern California, as well as in Mexico and Central America. She currently partners with several rescue organizations in Los Angeles to rescue and foster animals, including farm animals, until they are adopted into suitable homes. Professor Alvarez is dedicated to a vegan lifestyle and spreading awareness on issues of food justice among communities of color. Welcome, Linda!
I have had instances where people have asked me, or I've asked about Central America, and people have said it's Kansas. So I'm not referring to the center of the US, I'm referring to this region, right, between Mexico and South America, that is Central America, that is composed of these 7 countries. Specifically within these 7 countries, migration that we're seeing right now, and for several years now, Mexican migration used to be the most prominent migration. Now it's been overtaken to some degree by Central American migration. So we have a lot of people moving through this region from an area that is referred to as the Northern Triangle. So the Northern Triangle countries are these 3, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And so these countries are, originally the Northern Triangle was an economic classification based on a free trade agreement with Mexico. Eventually, the Northern Triangle came to be known as an extremely dangerous and violent area composed of these 3 countries. So this Northern Triangle, maybe I'll move around. This Northern Triangle didn't just become violent all of a sudden. It is a historical legacy of violence that has occurred in the region and that has fundamentally been many times supported and financed by the United States. So I will try not to get too political, but I will tell you the truth. And so The United States involvement in this region has caused much of the reasons why people are leaving. So for example, gangs are a huge issue, right? So there's been several waves, right? The narco trafficking and the drug trafficking that has taken over Central America has been very extreme, especially in the last years. And once security systems got put in place in Mexico, some of that drug trafficking moved to Central America. Initially though, gangs like you may have heard MS-13, 18th Street, all these, some of us live in the areas where they operate. These gangs didn't exist in Central America prior to the late mid-90s, when the United States actually made it a policy, an immigration policy, to deport any felons that were undocumented. They deported them to the Central American countries. These countries were not equipped. They did not have any kind of way to deal with an influx of gang members and people that were involved in this kind of stuff. And so it led to literally an explosion of more gangs in Central America they were unable to deal with. So why I'm saying this is because essentially, not just the gangs, the corruption, the femicide that takes place in Central America, the drug trafficking, right, which has gotten a lot worse, especially as drug lords fall out, they appear in new places, the human trafficking that's taking place, all of this creates a system in Central America that is literally, makes it unbearable to live there, right? And so an issue that we're dealing with is that in these three countries, it's called the Northern Triangle, but literally, this is the most violent region in the world, and a lot of people don't realize that because we don't really talk about it. And so when you think the most violent region in the world, a lot of people think maybe it's the Middle East, right? Maybe it's something that's going on where there's places in war, but in a place where there is no active war taking place, right? Central America is the next most violent place. And so living in El Salvador, which is the #1 most violent country at this point in time, is equivalent to living almost in a war zone. So when we talk about people leaving the country, we still seem to frame migrants coming from Central America as economic migrants, right? You hear the discourse that's taking place politically right now, and that has been forever, about, oh, they come here to take our jobs, they come here to take our ways of life. These people are literally fleeing for their lives. And in my talking to individuals in migrant shelters and here in the United States, we see that the violence is terrible. I have talked to people who, mothers who have come with their children, have left because gangs are literally trying to recruit their kids to become gang members as well, right? And to serve as narco-trafficking and do all kinds of things. And so one of the mothers came and she was talking to me about how previously people used to take the train, something called La Bestia, into the United States, or at least all the way down to the border. She loaded her kids up, all three of them, brought them on the train. While on the train, some bandits, or whatever you want to call them, gang affiliated as well, jumped on the train and actually raped her while her three children were watching the entire thing. And so she was forced to then, deal with that. And so it's people, what I want to really establish is that it's people fleeing for their lives. In the 1980s, there were a number of wars that took place in Central America. When people tried to get into the United States, they were not classified as refugees. They were not looked at as refugees. They were actually looked at as economic migrants again. And so when we talk about refugee crisis, definitely what's happening in Syria is a terrible, terrible thing. But we have a crisis of our own here, right? And we have a Central American crisis of migration of refugees, but we still refuse to acknowledge it as a refugee crisis. We just refer to it as an economic crisis. So when individuals are coming through, we see that violence is really the principal reason why a lot of people, at least now, are migrating from Central America. And so you'll see here, so we want to talk about kind of complexity, right, and things being problematic. This is actually the Tohono O'odham Nation territory. This is where most people are dying because for reasons that are very, that we all know, right? In terms of land sovereignty, indigenous land sovereignty, there's a resistance from the nation to let humanitarian groups and just any group onto this land, right? So we have a lot of immigrants dying in this region. But this becomes a deadly corridor for migrants. So not only have they passed through Central America, passed through Mexico. Generally in Mexico, they will deal with issues of violence. They will deal with issues of assault. Most of them are robbed as they're coming through. Most of them are assaulted in some way. Women are especially vulnerable. I should add that in this bottom part here, the bottleneck of Mexico, a lot of Central American women actually get stuck here. This is a stronghold of narco-trafficking and a lot of stuff going on here. So men will often make it through, but women get caught up in human trafficking and sex trafficking. So if they've made it through all of that, their next challenge is to make it through this. Walking through the desert, if you've ever been to this area or any desert area, you know it is, you need to be very well equipped. Now imagine you're told by your coyote, a smuggler, we're gonna get you in, just bring some stuff with you, we'll get you into the United States. Often what happens is that they will tell migrants, yeah, here's the border, we'll get you into the United States and you'll be in New York in like a day. So they're walking, right? And so I've had a lot of migrants say, well, we didn't know because we were told that if we cross in, then essentially we just needed a little bit of water and food because we could walk to New York in a day or so. So if you look at, this is still the desert. This is 1 day, where's my little thing? This is a 1 day walk in the desert from the border. This is a 2-day walk in the desert. This is a 3-day walk, and you haven't even really hit any big cities in Arizona yet, right? So there's a lot of misinformation that goes on. It becomes very, very problematic. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the migrants and how the stories that they have told me, their experiences, because I think it's important to give them their voice, right? And so in the interviews that I have done, I have talked to, just in terms of leaving, I've been asking them, why did you leave Central America? There are issues of violence, so I want to actually read to you some of the things that they have said in order to properly represent them. One gentleman, he was about 45 years old. He said, there's a lot of violence in Guatemala. One night some men came, they wanted my kids. They were outside of my house saying, we're going to take your son. They wanted to kidnap him to turn him into a drug dealer and make him part of their gang. They said that I could give him my son or give them $20,000. Otherwise, they would kill us both and then they would kill the rest of my family. The only place I could think that we could hide from these people was here in the United States. It's the only place they wouldn't be able to find us. So I left with my son. He's 12 years old. I had to leave my wife and the rest of my kids, my family, everything I know. We left that night. I worry about my family there every day, but I had to get my son out of there. This was what I heard over and over and over again. I had to leave to literally save my own life, right? One of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of migration is unaccompanied minors. And so there's a large number of kids coming through our southern border. So I spoke to a young man named Josue, and he, at this point, was 16, but when he first came in, he was 14. So he went through this whole process by himself, unaccompanied. I said, why did you come here? They killed my dad, and I left because I didn't want them to kill me. Those men had kidnapped my dad, and when we couldn't pay what they asked for, they killed him. Another very young girl I was speaking to said that she had traveled here by herself. The journey is very, very dangerous for women, and much less a young girl. She indicated that she had left her house because some guys were following her to and from school. And she was trying to avoid them. She did everything she could, and one night they broke into her house, and they literally tried to kidnap her and do other things to her. When her mother jumped in to save her, they literally chopped her with a machete. And then it was after that that her mother decided, you need to leave. However, I don't know how you're gonna get out of here, but you just need to go to the United States. And there began her journey. This is intermingled also with economic issues. I spoke to a young man who said, we literally had nothing in Guatemala. We ate tortillas and salt every single day. That's all we ate. And so my family had no food. We really didn't have any clothing. My goal was to eventually go to school, but I had to leave my country to come here and work. And now I send them $250 every 15 days. It's not a lot, but at least now I know that they have some food. And so these are the kinds of things that you hear. The stories are, I don't want to go too much into them. They don't get any better, right? In the process, I spoke to a young man who was smuggled in a truck. He literally, a trailer truck, which they put with cargo on the top, and then on the bottom, it'll be like an empty hull. And then they put people inside through basically what seems like a gas tank, right? And they go inside and they're shut in there. There's no air, there's no nothing, and they're driving through there from Mexico all the way down to the United States, right? So they explain over and over their traumatic experiences. In the desert, a lot of things happen. Many of them talked about passing dead bodies, right? These dots that you see here are people that have actually been found. There's a lot of people that haven't been found because these are around major streets, kind of waterways, things like that. The more security takes place, the more Border Patrol enforces this area, both not just here in the US, but in the southern border of Mexico, the more people will take more dangerous routes to get through. And so a lot of people will never be found because not only do we not know where they are, but also the elements of the desert. There's animals in the desert who may also consume these individuals, right? So all of this has occurred, and I wanted to kind of trace how violence is just a presence in migrant lives. And so that took me eventually to Ohio, where I met with it's a community in Ohio that works in slaughterhouses, and they are indigenous Guatemalan. And so some of the things that happen there is that they don't really speak even Spanish, right? So they don't speak English, they speak very limited Spanish. And as I'm talking to them now about what kinds of jobs they do, right? So you've been through all of this. They've explained coming through the desert, they've explained migrating, et cetera, and now they're working in a slaughterhouse, right? So what is this experience like? Some of them, I again will tell you a couple things of what they said. It's a dirty job, it's terrible. There's chicken shit everywhere, these are his words. It smells terrible. I've never before tasted this, but the chickens are so afraid, they jump everywhere, it gets in your mouth, it gets in your eyes. There's dust from the chicken everywhere. I can't breathe even with my mask on. I used to clean the machines. There was blood and chicken heads dripping everywhere. It's like being in a scary movie. They don't pay well. It's cold in there. You're always wet because you have to wash the blood off. I was always in pain. One of the young men I spoke to, remember a lot of these people are very young because they're working in this industry. They're barely 18. I debone the chickens. It's hours and hours of cutting and cutting. I awake in the morning and my hands are cramped. And he explained it as he would wake up and his hands would wake up in this position from literally repetitive action over and over and over again. I'm used to it now. My goal was once to graduate from the university. I wanted to be a teacher, but I had to leave all of that, and now I have to do this job. it becomes, it's kind of frustrating to talk about this because there's so many different levels here. So just because when we talk about violence, I want to move this for a second to the animal rescue side of things. A lot of the times the focus is on the issue, the pitting of workers against animals, right? A lot of the stories that you will hear, a lot of the, if you read any of the comment section, which nobody should ever do, but when you read, even if the story is attempting to present a more neutral perspective on workers and and the animals, the comments just take over with these people, why are they here? They should be killed too, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so part of why I was very interested in this project, because I wanted to contextualize violence. I wanted to contextualize trauma. It doesn't just, if you read these things, right, it would make it seem like everyone that works in a slaughterhouse is some kind of a sociopath, right? As if they're able to find hundreds and hundreds of people that just want to kill animals all day. And yes, I'm so excited, I got a job killing animals, right? When I ask workers, are you happy doing this job? Their answer is always, I don't conceptualize the idea of happy and job. I need a job, and so I do a job. This is not something that I'm excited about. I just have to get up and I have to get paid. And so that's what so that's a way of thinking about it, is really you have to look at this, like the speakers have been talking about earlier, you have to look at this in an intersectional way. You have to look at the lives and the lives of workers before they get into these areas and the situations that they're put into, which really don't give them any other choice. A young woman that I was speaking to said, it's not like tomorrow I can walk into Walmart and go and get a job as the door greeter. I have no papers, right? They're undocumented. And so the only job that I can do here is this. I can work in a slaughterhouse, I can process food, that's about it. That's all that's available to me. There's a lot of discrimination that goes on in the slaughterhouses, in the meat processing plants. Most of the people doing the worst jobs are Latinos, and in this case, in Ohio, they are indigenous Guatemalan people. And so when you talk about the idea of rights, I said, do you feel like you have rights in your job? They would look at me first like, again, I thought perhaps there's like a language barrier because I'm speaking in Spanish. I don't speak their different dialects, indigenous dialects. And they, when we talked a little more, they said, again, I'm just happy I have a job, right? I'm not thinking about whether I have rights or all this stuff. I just need to work to send money to my family and to survive. And so, I think Lauren touched on this a little earlier with a question that was asked, but our ability to sit here today and think about intersectionalism and veganism and what it means and workers' rights and everything that we're talking about today is, in a sense, a privileged thing for us to be able to do, because there are people literally right now working in a slaughterhouse doing a job that they don't want to do, and they really don't have a choice, right? They don't even have the time to sit and be like, is this a privileged, what is my privilege in this context, right? They're not, that's not their life, right? And so I want to just, kind of close with some of the questions I asked them about what do you feel when you're working in such close proximity with the animals, with chickens. For the most part, I spoke with people who worked in the chicken slaughterhouses or in chicken processing. And I spoke to some people who worked in dairy. I should mention that this is a total tangent, but I went to a dairy plant, and I really didn't know I was going to be there. Somebody I knew, through the whole research thing, said, "Oh, well, just come with me. We're going to go see where my husband works." I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Let's go visit your husband." And then we walked in the door, and then lines of cows all hooked up to to the dairy, you guys know what I'm talking about, the machines. And I was like, oh, this is where your husband works? Okay, that'd be good to know, like 5 minutes ago. So, I'm watching all this, and the cows are looking at me, and I'm like, oh, and then the workers are there, and I'm just having a million different emotions, and I'm like, okay, just got to get through this, I'll be in my hotel tonight, I can go to sleep. Then we walked to the back, and there was actually an area where the cows were giving birth, which I did not expect either. And I was like, oh, the miracle of life is happening right in front of me, and this little calf right to the side of it, seeing this amazing thing happen, and right next to it was a container pretty much with like 50 calves in it that had just, they're waiting to be processed either into more dairy or veal. And so it's a very, I guess, convoluted situation in terms of how do you think about all these different things, right? The animals are right there, the workers. And so I just want to read to you a couple of quotes. This is from somebody who worked in a slaughterhouse, in a dairy plant. The animals know if you're a good or a bad person. They get to know you. If the cows don't like you, they will kick you. I know when I first started, they were upset because they didn't know me, but now I talk to them. They know me, so we are okay now. We are friends. Right? This is from a dairy worker. There was one specifically, I'm almost done here, who mentioned, let me just find that one, who basically said, like a person, this is somebody who worked in the chicken slaughter. Like a person, an animal has a heart. They have feelings. I know that they can't talk, but I know they feel pain. But what can we do? What can I do? I'm here. I have no papers. This is the only job that I can do. That is their life. They're meant to suffer just like us. The chickens and I actually have a lot in common. We are both in a place we don't want to be, far from everything we know, everything that is natural to us, doing things we don't want to do. We are afraid. We are always afraid. Life is not fair for the chickens. It's not fair for us. But what can I do? There's nothing that I can do, right? So in these contexts, I'll close with this. Violence and trauma is actually something that is fundamentally systemic and structural. And so it's not just about talking about violence in a slaughterhouse and what happens there. It's not just about the issue of animals. It's about the issue of workers. It's about the issue of animals. And it's the fundamental systemic and structural violence that's woven into our pretty much entire system when we're talking about people of color, when we're talking about the issues of migrants, and when we're talking about animal rights and the slaughter that's involved in that. Interestingly, the last question that I asked everybody was like, if somebody could, if I could say I can make all your dreams come true right now, what would your dream be? And every single person that I talked to said, my dream would be to have papers. I just wish I could stay here, or that I could visit my family and come back. And so, again, the idea of privilege, right? If I ask every one of you guys, what's your dream? What's your dream? I'll make your dreams come true right now. We would say a variety of different things, right? But each one of them, their goal was to just be able to stay here and work, right? And so these are the contexts in which people are operating. And these are the contexts in which we need to understand workers in this seriously nasty, violent industry, right? And so it's not even just about saying, let's just get rid of all slaughterhouses, because then what happens to the workers, right? So it's complex, and it's going to take people like us to literally sit and think about it and talk about it and work these things out together, because there is no easy fix to this problem. It goes, I'm tracing the violence from Central America to the United States, but it's cyclical, and I promise I will end on this point. The guy that I told you at the beginning who left because his 12-year-old son was going to be killed, he said, I said, so how do you like living in the U.S. now? You're here now. And he said, it's really great. We could only eat tortillas and everything over there. But now that we're here in the U.S., my son actually loves Burger King. We had never tried Burger King ever. And now he eats Burger King every day. And we didn't have soda. And he loves soda now, and he drinks soda every day, right? So again, all this just kind of does a 360 on your ideas of food and privilege, right? What do we do with somebody who, for them, it's something that they've never been able to experience is to have Burger King, right? And here we are as vegans like, no, not Burger King, right? It just shifts your mentality, right? So I'm gonna end there because I could talk for 50 more hours, so I won't go on any more than that.
So we're going to take a couple questions. Please make them questions and not speeches. We're going to take maybe about 3 or so try to get people who haven't spoken yet. Give everyone a voice.
Hi, thank you for that. I just had a question about your thoughts on undercover investigations, which from a prosecutorial standpoint, if we ever even see charges pressed, unfortunately are often on workers individually, which doesn't address the systemic and structural problems that you were speaking to, or view the workers as victims themselves.
My first experience with this was I was volunteering at a farm sanctuary, and I don't know what he was, the shelter manager or whatever, had said to me, yeah, I saw these guys, I went to a dairy plant, I saw these guys, and they were totally hurting these cows. Those beaners don't know that I could just call ICE tomorrow and get rid of all of them, right? And so, again, it's a very ignorant mentality and understanding of the actual crisis, right? So for undercover investigators, I mean, look, a lot of the guys that I talked to said, I got used to it. I have to get used to it, right? Chicken catchers probably have one of the worst jobs. They have to literally catch chickens in the dark and throw them into cages and try to figure out how to not hurt them, supposedly, because they will be penalized for that. If you were to see some of the things and the environments in which they have to work, they have to become desensitized to some extent, right? One of the guys that I talked to said it really hurt him to see the chickens when he first started because he had chickens in Guatemala, and he started naming them all. Like, I had Lupita, I had Sandra, and those were his chickens in Guatemala that he used for eggs. But he said, I would never treat one of my chickens the way they treat chickens here. But if I sit, this is what he said, if I sit and I think, look at how they're treating the chickens, I won't have a job. And then, what else can I do here? I can't do anything else. So the thing with undercover is that, yeah, you may be catching some people who, unfortunately, are caught in this systemic violence, right? And that's one of the things we need to think about, definitely, in the movement.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm actually from El Salvador. I know what it's like to be there. So I'm wondering, how do you keep yourself safe when you're doing the research south of the border?
I hope for the best. I haven't encountered any issues really. There have been some places where it's been a little sketchy, but for the most part, I'm connected to an organization, or I'm directly working with the migrant shelter. And so through them, I either go with a group, or I'm there during the day or something like that. But I haven't really had any issue with safety or violence for the most part. And I'm in Mexico too. I'm not in El Salvador. I'm in the shelters in Mexico. Yeah.
So, we're talking. You're talking about all these people and how you're saying that they need work and that they don't have any choice. And at one point, I think you're talking about politics.
Mm-hmm.
if Trump, this is a big if, but if Trump becomes president, would these workers, would they be really scared of what he would do? Because I'm pretty sure he'll hunt them down and deport them.
Yeah, I think we're all really scared of what will happen if we all need to move somewhere if he wins. But yes, actually, I asked every single migrant that I talked to, how do you feel about the current state of politics in the United States? And again, every single one of them said, we are very stressed because if Trump wins, we don't know what's going to happen to us. So I don't know if I'm going to be deported. Some of them have kids here, and so they said, I fear for my children. Will they be left here and then I get sent back? What will happen? So there's a lot of uncertainty among the community and a lot of fear definitely among the community, which is also a part of structural and systemic violence, is constant fear and constant stress, right? So this is the reality of the workers, unfortunately.
Is it true that President Obama has deported more immigrants than all other presidents combined? And I also heard on the topic of, people from Central America, like that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of, was trying to turn away the children who were fleeing the violence in Honduras. Is that true?
I'm trying not to get political, but I will tell the truth. And yes, Obama did deport. He is known as the king of deportation. He deported more people than any other administration. Was fully endorsed and supported by Hillary Clinton. And she was very active in turning away child migrants when they arrived, which makes some of the commercials that she has about children very interesting. But yes, so unfortunately, Latin America has always been seen as the backyard of the United States. And whatever happens there is what happens there, right? It doesn't really make headlines because we would have no political parties, right? So.
Thank you, Dr. Linda Alvarez.